Hello there! Welcome to my review of the pilot episode of the Rockford Files, later retitled Backlash of the Hunter. First broadcast on the 27th of March 1974. It was written by the show's creators, Stephen J. Cannell and Roy Huggins, and directed by Richard T. Heffron.
Billings, LAPD. You know Thursday is Chapman's 20th year and we're giving a little surprise party at the captain's. I think you should come. By the way, we need $5 for the present.
The episode begins with the answer phone message that would become a trademark of the show, although this one is repeated in Season 6. Apparently, it was added to this episode when the show went into syndication and wasn't present during the original cut. After the theme tune, the opening credits play out over scenes of the Malibu shores before we get a stock footage shot of a seafront cafe. How do I know it's stock footage? Because it's stock footage from Columbo, from the episode The Most Crucial Game. Is this an early example of an interconnected universe, the Universal Verse? Who knows? It then cuts to Jerry doing some martial arts training in his gym. He's played by William Smith. Jerry receives a phone call from Millie, played by Nita Talbot. If the version you watch doesn't have this scene, or the answer phone scene, then you're watching the pilot movie rather than the two-part syndicated episodes I'm reviewing. The differences between the two versions are small, but if I mention something that you don't recall seeing, that's why. Both Talbot and Smith appeared in Season 2 episodes of Columbo, A Stitch in Crime and The Greenhouse Jungle, respectively. So it's not just footage from that show they use in this pilot, it's actors too. Millie tells Jerry she thinks they're in trouble. We then see Jerry following a city bus. A homeless man on that bus appears to be the focus of his attention, as it's the focus of the camera's attention. Eventually, the bus gets to the beach, and the driver tells him to get out. He tells the driver he's waiting to meet somebody, but gets off the bus and heads for the funfair. The man heads under the pier, starts drinking, and is promptly strangled by Jerry, who seems to revel in the murder. Jerry then steals the man's shoes to make it look like a tramp-on-tramp robbery. For a Columbo fan, this is familiar territory, as this episode too is an inverted mystery. We know who did it, but we don't know why. It's a heck of an opening scene. We have very little idea of what exactly is going on here, but it sets up both Jerry and Millie as the villains, and shows exactly how vicious Jerry is, in a quite brutal scene. It has its problems, though. We never find out who the man was supposed to be going to meet, and it's clear he was supposed to meet someone, as Millie is worried. We never find out how Millie has found out what the man is up to, or how Jerry is able to track him down on the bus so easily. Also, it follows the legs of the two characters for a little too long, that goes beyond building dramatic tension and becomes a little bit tiresome. It was a cliché that was deftly made fun of in the Police Squad series. We then very briefly meet Sergeant Dennis Becker, who has been told to drop the case because it's not worth pursuing, but Becker has a hunch there's more to it.
Well, that looks like a mugging except for one thing. He had a pretty good bubble on his finger. A wedding ring with a half-carat stone. We had it appraised for $200.
Some diamond probably wouldn't scratch glass.
Becker isn't very prominent in this episode, but it's nice he gets established in the pilot to introduce the character who would become so integral to the series. We then meet Sarah Butler, played by Lindsay Wagner. Sarah finds Jim Rockford's now famous Yellow Pages ad which Shane Black even pays homage to in The Nice Guys, and goes to see Rockford at his mobile home trailer. Rockford is walking back from fishing with his dad, who, for the pilot only, is played by Robert Donnelly. Also, in this episode only, the scenes inside Rockford's home are shot on location, and you can see why they decided to move to a set, because it's incredibly dark and claustrophobic, and I'm so glad they did, as I don't think there's much more they could have done with the staging of scenes with this location going forward. Rockford is quite abrupt with Sarah until he's sure she can pay him, even running a credit check on her after she's gone, which is not something we see him do again, but neatly sets up not only how he has no money, but also is regularly enough stiffed by his clients that he needs to run credit checks on them. Sarah wants Rockford to investigate her father's murder, her father being the homeless man we saw in the opening. Sarah takes Jim to see her brother Nick, played by Bill Mumy. Nick reluctantly agrees to tell Rockford what has made Sarah suspicious. He makes deliveries from his pharmacy job to a woman, Mrs. Elias, who has offered to pay to put him through medical school, and lives too far away from his pharmacy for it to be her local one. This plot point feels a little rushed in order to get from one clue to another, as we later find out that Mrs. Elias is Millie from the start of the episode.
Hello, Mrs. Elias. I didn't want to bother you, but there's a man up here who seems quite interested in the coroner's report I filed.
The middle of this episode then starts to sag a little and gets a little repetitive. We have Jim thinking there's no case, finding out Sarah can't pay him, then investigating anyway, finding out information which makes him want to give up investigating again until he decides to investigate more. It is structurally a little bland and feels like it's just there to pad the pilot. But it does mean we get to see Rockford go to visit with Angel Martin, played by Stuart Margolin, at the newspaper he now works at. This is a great little scene between the two that really sets up their relationship well, even if it doesn't quite get into how much of a pain Angel will become. It's more character set up for a recurring character, as we saw with Dennis Becker. The studio wanted Angel cut from the pilot and cut from the series at first, but Garner and the writers fought for the character to remain, and would add him to as many episodes as they could get away with, against the studio's wishes. Right up until Stuart Margolin won an Emmy, and the studio had a sudden change of heart, wanting him in as many episodes as possible. Angel admits to Jim of being guilty of what he was convicted of.
Did that bank job?
Yeah? When we were in prison, you must have told me 100 times you were innocent.
Well, I wasn't.
And expects Jim to do the same, but Jim really was innocent, which Angel has a lot of trouble believing.
You were in on that robbery, right?
Wrong.
I don't believe you.
It's some welcome humour that begins to set up the nature of their relationship, Rockford's guilt or innocence over his incarceration, and this is something the series will play with throughout the show's run, despite him having received a pardon. It's revealed that Mrs. Elias married a much older man who died on their wedding night, and she inherited his $10 million fortune. It's how she's able to pay for Nick's medical degree, but still doesn't explain why, so Rockford continues to investigate, being suspicious of the death of Mr. Elias. He goes to see one of the 4 doctors who declared Mr. Elias died of natural causes, and after he leaves, this doctor calls Mrs. Elias and tells her Rockford is investigating her husband's death. With this information seemingly confirming that there again is no case, Jim is about to drop it, until he notices Jerry is following him. He goes to see Millie, pretending to be the Dean of Admissions for a medical school, and it would appear after Ken Franklin was arrested for murder in Columbo Murder by the Book, and Eric Wagner was murdered in Columbo The Most Crucial Game, Millie Elias decided to move into their former homes, and is sitting out by the very pool that Eric Wagner was murdered in. After Jim leaves, having spoken to her, again satisfied that everything is on the level, Jerry is waiting for Millie and angrily confronts her about Rockford being there.
What was he doing here?
What are you doing here?
You don't even know who he is, do you?
Yes, I do. His name is Simpson.
His name is Rockford, and he's a man you sent me to follow.
We then cut to Sarah and Jim settling their bill at another Columbo location from Murder by the Book, the hot dog-shaped hot dog stand where Columbo meets Mike Tucker, the insurance man. Rockford heads off, once again pursued by Jerry, and goes to a cabaret bar he apparently frequently visits, although not a location that ever recurs in the series. And it is a very odd place by today's standards, and possibly by 1970s standards for anywhere outside of LA. He sets a trap for Jerry in the bathroom and waits, and waits, and waits. Jerry is not too bright, and it takes him a while to work out where Jim might have gone. As he enters the bathroom, he falls for Rockford's trap, just in time for the end of part 1. Part 2 begins with Jim tying Jerry's feet to the top of a bathroom stall before waking him up. He questions Jerry, but Jerry is giving nothing away. So Jim leaves and waits for Jerry to escape, so the follower now becomes the followee. This time, it's Jerry who heads to his favourite haunt. A disco that really couldn't be more 70s if it tried. In another odd plot choice, Jim then goes and gets Sarah, so she can go into the disco and seduce the incredibly scary, huge and murderous Jerry, and dope his drink once they've gone back to his apartment. She jokingly asks what to do if Jerry sexually assaults her, except she uses more explicit language.
Pick up some guy who's probably an emotional cripple and is going to try and rape me?
He's not going to try and rape you.
And it's played off very casually. But up until the point at which the drug takes effect, it seems like this is a very real possibility. And it's pretty shocking that Jim would put her in that incredibly dangerous situation. It's a pretty dark plot point that is thankfully only in the pilot, as in the series the only person that Jim regularly puts in such immediate danger is Angel Martin, and usually because he deserves it. They do manage to find a photo of Jerry with Millie though, so I guess it was all worth it. Back at Sarah's, they share a kiss, and Jim tries to get Sarah to let go of her grief for her father. I understand that Sarah was meant to be a regular character in the show, and was likely replaced with Beth Davenport after Universal decided not to pick up Lindsay Wagner's contract. But the relationship here is not very well developed. To me, it feels like they do a much better job of establishing Jim's romantic relationships in the series proper, even though the episodes are half the length of this one. Meanwhile, Jerry recovers and speaks with Millie, who he argues with and almost kills, until she reminds him of her money, further emphasising what danger Sarah was truly in what is a genuinely frightening scene where it looks as if Jerry's about to kill Millie, or worse.
I almost killed a golden goose.
We then get a too long flashback of some of the early events in the episode, most likely a way to recap the events of the first part for when the pilot was split into a two-parter. This ends with Jim asking Sarah to tell him about her father. This conversation results in her revealing that he went missing for a while, and when she tells him when her dad disappeared, he realises exactly what's going on, and they both head to Vegas, where the Eliases were married. But before they can go to the chapel, Jerry gets there first and shoots the minister they were looking for. A car chase ensues, with Jerry eventually getting away in a plane. On the drive home, Rockford finally explains exactly what went on. Mr. Elias actually died before the wedding with Millie was going to take place. So Millie and Jerry used Sarah's father as a stand-in for Mr. Elias, so she would inherit his fortune. They then killed Sarah's father to keep him quiet. It's a great reveal, but he's a little too heavy on the exposition, particularly as the exposition is squashed between two action scenes, because at that moment Jerry returns in the plane and starts shooting at them with a machine gun. Eventually, Rockford's car is damaged, but he and Sarah are able to hide behind some rocks, and he manages to hit the plane's fuel tank, forcing it to land, in a scene that would echo Stephen Cannell's later series The A-Team, as they both get away unharmed just before the plane explodes. It's a bit far-fetched, and I think the writers know this, as they sort of make fun of it at the end of the episode.
Look, I don't know how to tell you this, Buster, but you just can't go around shooting down light aircraft with a handgun.
But I guess it's not impossible, just highly improbable. Rockford and Sarah then get a lift in a cement mixer truck and pick up Jerry and his muscle/pilot on the way, getting them to ride in the still-moving mixer section. At the nearest police station, they drop the two off, and Rockford is held by the police for having a gun without a permit. Overall, this is not a great episode. It has some really good things going for it, but it has a lot of negatives too. The structure doesn't quite work. It feels like a series of scenes rather than a coherent story. There's a distinct lack of wit and humour that would become a staple of the show, and the final car plane chase scene is more ambitious and over the top than the budget or technology of the time allows. The finale is overly long, and the villains are either ineffectual or incompetent, except when they need to be the opposite, at which point they become amazingly competent. The plot only really moves forward because the villains keep doing dumb things, and they could have got away with it if they had done nothing at all. Luckily, the show gets much better as it goes on, and James Garner gives a wonderful performance that gives the pilot enough charm to carry the weaknesses of the episode. It isn't a bad representation of what the show would become, but he's different enough that it feels not quite right. Not a great pilot, but Garner does enough to keep me interested. 3 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.
The trouble with karate, Jerry, is it's based on a ridiculous assumption that the other guy will fight fair.